In this video, my plan is to remove the backgrounds of these two photographs here on the right, again, to prepare these images for tracing and vectorizing them here in Illustrator. Once again, like in the previous video, we will use Photoshop to do these edits. Let's start with the simple one, the seagull. I'm going to select that image and click on Edit Original, which will open it up in Photoshop. If you are not a subscriber to Creative Cloud and you only have Illustrator as a standalone product, unfortunately you won't be able to use this application, and you will need to find an alternative software you can use to do similar techniques. Of course, I'm going to include the edited files so you can practice with them in case you don't have access to Photoshop. But let's have a look at how to do this selection here. Now, what we can see already is that it is a fairly simple image. So there's nothing in the background apart from the big blue sky. So that must be easy to remove. And luckily it is, because there is a tool in Photoshop called Magic Wand. W is the shortcut for it. And all you have to do with this, with the default setting it has, is to simply click on the background. Now, you would expect everything to be selected, but even a very simple background like this would have different tones or different shades of that color, in this case the blue. So on the top left and bottom left, the reason why I didn't select everything is because those parts are much darker than the rest of the sky. This is actually due to the fact of the cameras and the lenses on them. It's called vignetting, that the corners are getting darker, but luckily there's a very easy fix. All you have to do is to still use the magic wand, but hold down the shift key to be able to add these points to it. And it actually found both corners immediately. So that was really smart. To invert my selection, I have to go to the select menu and choose inverse. Don't confuse this with the image adjustments invert, which would invert the colors. Select inverse inverses your selection. So when you click on that, you will get a selection of exactly the opposite that we made a selection of. So this is the seagull and not the sky. And once I have that selection, I can just simply click on this little icon here at the bottom of the layers panel, which is called creating a layer mask. Once I click on that, it separates the seagull from the background. And that grid, what you see, is how Photoshop shows transparency. So that's practically empty see-through parts of the document. And notice how our selection was saved as a black and white image. That's what we call a mask. Now you can learn a lot more about masking and making selections if this is something important for you, which I explain in great detail in my other courses. I talk about making selections of people. I also have a course specifically about masking. And of course, you can learn a lot more about Photoshop in general in my Photoshop Masterclass. And even though Illustrator is great and it's a very powerful application on its own, it gets even better when you use Photoshop in combination with it. So it's definitely worth investing time in learning Photoshop besides learning Illustrator. For those who actually started with the Photoshop Masterclass and moved on to this course, can even fast forward this because this is already something that we learned about. But let me continue preparing this image right now. So what I need to do at this point is to save this as a PSD file, a Photoshop document. The reason why that is important, because currently it is a JPEG, which doesn't support transparency, and that will be important for us. So I can go to File and choose Save As. I will save it into the same folder with the same name, but it is going to be a Photoshop document, so the format is different. Once I click on Save, I will see it up there being saved. But if I come back to Illustrator, it won't actually recognize that I've done anything, because this image here is still the original JPEG. Now we need to relink this file in this case. I intentionally wanted to show you this as well because it could happen that you need to do this. So to be able to do that, I need to click on the linked file option here where I get the drop down, And this little icon here is relinking. So if I click on that, I can now choose the PSD, the one which we already masked out, and then I can click on place, and it should remember the original location, the size, and everything else of that image, but now it is linking to the PSD and not the JPEG. So we will practice the same method with this other image. So I have the image selected and I'm going to click on Edit Original. Once again, it's a JPEG, so we will have to save at the end a PSD from it. But first of all, let's just try the same method using the magic wand and click on the background. It's not creating really good selections there, but we can try using the Shift key and clicking a couple of times. It is still going to struggle with that because there's so many different shades of green and black as well in the background, and it is very difficult to select them all at once. I could use other selection tools as well in Photoshop, or I could try to select the girl instead, but that's again not going to be an easy feat. So what I recommend in this case is a brilliant feature in Photoshop CC called Focus Area, which can recognize whatever is in focus in an image and separate it from the out of focus areas. So if I use Select Focus Area, it is going to do an automatic scan and look for focus areas in the image, and it did a pretty good job at that. So all I have to do is to make sure that any details that were missed are added, so just simply painting over them. And I could switch to the minus brush and paint over a couple of these details here in the background. But this is actually not even necessary because we will take this to the next step, which is called Select and Mask. It is a well-known fact that selecting hair is one of the most complex and most difficult thing to do, even in Photoshop, which is the most advanced image editing application. But since Photoshop Creative Cloud, we have actually a very smart technique. So this is the one that's called Select and Mask. Within this, all I have to do is to have this tool selected called the Refine Edge Brush tool and simply paint over around the edges where I can see that the background is still showing up and the hair doesn't look good. If I go all around the edges, it already starts to look much better. I can also draw around this part here and maybe the other shoulder as well. But unfortunately, this didn't get rid of everything. What I like to do is to change the background color. If I have a bright hair color, then I like to work with a darker background. Like on black in this case, from the view drop down, is going to work quite nicely. But more importantly, what you should do is to help Photoshop by manually removing some details that are not necessary. And to do that, you need to switch to the selection tool and set it to minus mode, or hold down the Alt and just paint over any of those areas where you feel like it's actually including things that you don't need. So that way you can help Photoshop out a bit and get a much better result. Now at this point I like to also go into the view and choose black and white. That's going to show me the actual mask, which is almost like an X-ray view of our final result. And if you see any patchy details still, you can go over them, like here as well. I can still see a bit, also there, I can remove a bit from it. And if I see any black details showing up here where the face is supposed to be, I can switch to the plus mode and just paint over those quickly. Just again, be careful not to go too close to the edge, otherwise you will include again more details from the background. Now once again, I don't want to go too deep into making professional selections here because we need to get back to Illustrator as soon as possible. But what I will do now is to click on OK. So we have our selection ready, and in this case, it is the girl that's selected and not the background, so it is ready to be turned into a mask. All I have to do is exactly what we've done in the previous image, click on the mask icon here at the bottom, and voila, there's our beautiful selection. So let's finalize this by saving it as a PSD file, a Photoshop document, and then going back to Illustrator once it's ready, Having the image selected, I click on linked file, relink, and choose the PSD version, place, and it's going to update it straight away for us. So now we have all 4 images ready to be traced and turned into vector artwork. And I promise this time, without any further delay, it's going to happen in the next video.